As John said, we're moving right next door now to Stephen's Baltic Street site, to the site of the glassworks on Salamander Street. So last year at this conference, I gave a brief preliminary overview of the cordial bottles from Salamander Street Glassworks, where this year we'll look at these again a little bit more in depth alongside the rest of the glass assemblage now that the analysis of the material is complete. For a bit of a background, glassmaking in Leith can be traced back to at least the third quarter of the 17th century, with an early glass house situated within the citadel. Then from the latter 17th to mid-18th centuries, along the western side of the water of Leith, near Commercial Wharf, and finally from around 1746 in South Leith, where the Edinburgh Glasshouse Company established a new glassworks fronting onto Salamander Street. Excavations by AOC uncovered the remains of these Salamander Street glassworks, revealing 4 glass houses, along with numerous ancillary structures, workshops, and other features relating to both the earlier Edinburgh Glasshouse Company and the later Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company, which operated the site between 1824 and 1874. These glassworks were largely associated with the production of wine and ale bottles, but were also producing lime cordial bottles, carbonated drinks bottles, carboys, chemistry ware, tableware, and crown window glass, amongst other products. Over 380 kilograms of glass was recovered, including almost 60 kilograms of glassworking waste, reflecting the various processes and stages of glass production. Glassworking tools were also identified, including a large pair of tweezers for manipulating and shaping the glass, a long knife used for scoring and trimming, an iron ladle, and numerous shovels that would have been used for stoking the furnaces, and fragments of the glass melting crucibles that contain the molten glass within the furnaces ready for working. What was recovered is a nationally significant assemblage of Scottish glass, the majority of which dates to the second and third quarters of the 19th century, mostly relating to the operations of the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company, though a considerable amount of late 18th and early 19th century glass was also identified, representing products produced by the earlier Edinburgh Glasshouse Company. The majority of the classifiable glass represents cylindrical wine and ale bottles, which mostly survive as heavily fragmented base, body, neck, and finish shards, with only 6 intact examples recovered. Most are rickets molded types that date from around the 1830s or later, although the majority of the recovered glass likely represents the remains of the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company's later stages of production during the third quarter of the 19th century. Rickets molded bottles are produced in a type of 3-piece mold into which the glass was blown that allowed for bottles identical in size to be produced and also permitted embossed lettering to be placed on the bottle bases, which could identify the bottle manufacturer or the bottle's contents. Amongst these bases is a limited but significant group that specifically indicates production by the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company, embossed with versions of the company's mark. 19 bases embossed with Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company marks were noted, comprising 5 separate types. Types 1 to 3 present variations of the letters E and L for Edinburgh and Leith, while types 4 and 5 are a little more elaborate, spelling out the company name around the inner circumference. There's no clear chronological or stylistic evolution of these logos. However, an interesting result of XRF analysis done by Dr. Helen Spencer looked at the elemental components of the glass, which could suggest that the Type 5 design may be the earliest, predating the 1840s, while a Type 4 bottle that was sampled postdates 1845. Whether these represent an evolution in design or different bottle contents is unclear, though they were clearly being produced during the later second and third quarters of the 19th century, most likely associated with cones A and D. Almost 135 kilograms of rickets molded bottle bases were retrieved from one of the structures relating to cone C. These represent wasters or production failures that may have failed during the annealing process, which is the controlled cooling of the glass needed in order to prevent breakage. This may be evidenced by the relatively low recovery of bottle shoulder shards, which is typically the thinnest point in the bottle and may have been prone to failure. This broken glass would have been retained as cullet for later recycling, where it was added to a glass batch to help speed up the melting process, but in this case was never used. Further likely cullet stores include one close to the edge of cone A, producing mostly wine and ale bottle shards dating between the 1780s and mid-1800s, including 5 intact bottles that were likely discarded due to the poor quality of their fabric, and another located adjacent to Cone C, made up mostly of distorted Ricketts bottle shards. One of the most significant aspects of the assemblage are the cordial bottles, which represent lime juice cordial bottles produced by the L. Rosen Company. Over 29 kilograms of these bottle fragments were recovered, including some from in situ deposits within Cone B. Definite concentrations of cordial bottle fragments were also noted within ancillary structures in the western half of the site, with no cordial bottles recovered in the eastern half of the site at all. 5 distinct bottle forms are present, including both cylindrical and flask-shaped. The fragments all represent base and body shards, neck shards, and finishes, again with an almost complete lack of shoulder shards, and it is likely that the shoulder breakages, possibly during annealing, led to a significant number of bottles being discarded. Lachlan Rose was a former ship chandler in Leith and came from a family of shipbuilders who were later associated with the provisioning of ships, including supplying them with lime juice to help combat scurvy, which at the time was served mixed with rum. L. Rose and Company was established in 1865 as lime juice and wine merchants, continuing to supply ships with provisions, though Lachlan Rose had a notion to create a marketable sweetened lime drink that could be enjoyed by both sailors and the general public, while crucially omitting the involvement of alcohol. His method for preserving citrus juice was patented in 1867, which led to the production of what was dubbed the world's first and still surviving branded fruit drink, and quickly became a huge success both at sea and on land. Rose's lime juice cordial is still available and enjoyed today, now under the ownership of Coca-Cola. The rapid rise in popularity of Rose's lime cordial can be attributed to a number of factors coinciding at just the right time. 1867 brought the Merchant Shipping Act, requiring by law provisions of lime and lemon juice to be kept aboard both naval and merchant ships on voyages exceeding 10 days to combat scurvy. The disease, caused by an extreme deficiency in vitamin C, can cause a number of horrific symptoms, eventually leading to blindness and death, and was particularly rampant amongst shipborne passengers and crew, as well as within other isolated communities where food provisioning and fresh food supply were poor. In that same year, Lachlan Rose submitted his patent for preserving citrus juice using sulfuric acid and sugar within airtight bottles instead of alcohol, making it both accessible and attractive to the wider public, which all took place against the backdrop of prohibition and increasing concerns over general health. Analysis of the bottles has identified 5 types, which you can see examples of here. 3 of these are embossed with a distinctive lime and leaf pattern that was trademarked in 1868 and still features on the plastic bottles available today. Types 1A and 1B are variations of a plain cylindrical bottle type embossed with the company name and information, with 1B including it within a shield logo. Types 2A and 2B are embossed with the patented lime and leaf pattern and have blank panels where a paper label would have been placed. The pattern differs in size and design on 2B, which is also cross vines at the base in place of the ribbons seen on 2A. The Type 3 is a flask-shaped bottle, perhaps intended for shipboard use, and is embossed with the lime and leaf pattern as well as the company name and information. From print advertisements, we know that by 1868, L. Rose was producing 4 separate products, including lime juice cordial, lime ginger cordial, prepared lime juice, and lime juice champagne. What remains unclear is if the variations seen in the bottle types represent different products or evolutions in the same bottle design, or if some may be design tests. Type 2A was by far the most common type recovered, followed by Type 3, while only a few examples of Type 1A and only a single example of Type 1B and 2B were retrieved. The cordial bottles were clearly being produced by the glassworks, recovered from cullet deposits and in situ deposits, with numerous fabric flaws and malformed examples and significant variations of color, often within the same bottle type. This last point is of potential significance when you consider the widespread marketing of the product to the general public, where bottle form and content color all contribute to brand recognition, and the message of consistent quality and variations in bottle color and form could lead to a push in perception in the wrong direction. Dating of these types provides a very tight chronology, highlighting a brief period in time where the rapid rise of L. Rose and Company overlapped with the downfall and closure of the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company. This marks a period in Leith's history where bottles produced at the Salamander Street site were being sent down the road for bottling at Rose's factory on Commercial Street and then shipped via the adjacent Leith docks. The known dates of the L. Rose Company patent in 1867 and the final closure of the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company in 1874 places the production of these cordial bottles to a mere 7-year period. Quite significantly, the plain cylindrical bottles, to which no parallels have yet been identified, may predate the lime and leaf pattern and could be dated specifically to 1867, after the patent was filed and before the design was trademarked. The carbonated drinks bottle fragments are mostly limited to torpedo or egg-shaped bottles and round-bottom bottle types. The most significant of these are a group of long cylindrical round-bottom bottle fragments representing a minimum of 10 heavily flawed discarded bottles, including a largely intact example that were recovered from the central furnace and flue of Cone D. These bottles have embossed lettering with Carrera water down one side and patent down the other, and would have contained an aerated bicarbonate of lime mineral water health drink that was patented by a chemist called Mr. Maugham around 1845, with this bottle type designed to contain the highly pressurized contents. Sometimes known as a Maugham bottle, this is a very uncommon type with no exact parallels to these identified and were clearly produced on site. The majority of the carbonated drinks bottle assemblage are torpedo bottles, which are ovoid bottles with pointed bases dating from around the 1810s to 1870s. Just under 6 kilograms of this bottle type was recovered, with little evidence to suggest that they were being produced by the glassworks. While production on site is possible, it's likely that a considerable number of these were consumed and discarded on site, perhaps by the thirsty glassworkers. The earlier Edinburgh Glasshouse Company was known to have produced carboys, which are large capacity containers that are usually globular in shape and were primarily used to transport and store corrosive liquids such as sulfuric acid and ether. There are around 14 shards likely representing carboy fragments, including large diameter base fragments and large finishes. While on-site production cannot be confirmed by these remains, they likely relate to the latter 18th and early 19th centuries. It's also possible that some of the larger diameter finish fragments may derive from larger scale wine bottles, such as Solomon's or Balthazar's. While much of the window glass derives from the demolished structures, there's also evidence for window glass production, specifically crown glass, which the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company was known to have produced to help supply the demand for the expanding Newtown. Manufacturing evidence is presented by a crown glass bullseye with score marks along the sides from where the circular disc was divided into rectangular window panes. Other glassworks products include limited quantities of cylindrical tubes and possible vessel shards identified as chemistry wares, which are specialized forms involved in scientific laboratory studies. Analysis of this assemblage by Dr. Craig Kennedy and Dr. Ellen Spencer has identified a production link between these and those uncovered at Old College as used by the chemist Dr. Joseph Black. The glassworks were also known to have produced significant quantities of lead crystal glass, including decorative household glass and tablewares, though only limited quantities of associated working waste was present, along with only a handful of vessel fragments, which showed no clear indication of on-site production. In the absence of production flaws, in some cases it can be difficult to distinguish between glass produced by the glassworks and glass consumed on site by or relating to its workers. These classifications include drinks bottles, food storage vessels, including an intact Yorkshire relish bottle, household glass, including a number of ink bottles, personal items, and medicinal and toiletry bottle glass. An interesting find amongst these and a rare personal item is this tiny molded opaque white frit glass figurine standing in the front, recovered from one of the workshops off of Cone D that depicts a cloaked, bearded, and praying figure and may come from a nativity set. In addition to the waste bottles and cullet hoards, the main evidence for glass production comes from the glass waste, and most significantly, the glassworking waste that has been directly produced as the result of blowing, shaping, and finishing the bottles and other objects. This includes a mixture of runs, pulls, ribbons, droplets, and threads, which are usually dropped around the furnace gathering holes during glassworking, as well as a number of twisted rods, offcuts from trimming, paraison ends, moils, and blowpipe residue. Some of the more diagnostic glassworking waste include the moil fragments, which are the cylinders of glass left on the blowing iron after the object has been removed, and paraison ends, which are little protrusions of glass at the tip of the blown object that are removed prior to shaping. There are also fragments of glass from around the blowpipe, which are semicircular in shape and have what appears to be iron residue from the blowpipes along the inner surfaces. A small coil of glass was also found, which has no clear function or associated process, and may be the result of a glassworker simply playing around. Other glassworking waste includes bottle wasters, heavily distorted due to heat, on top of large quantities of glass slag, furnace waste, and translucent to semi-translucent lumps of raw glass in a range of different colors. Some of the raw glass could represent the remains of the unused batch from within the glass melting crucibles, although this was often fastidiously recovered from the broken crucibles for later recycling. Glass analysis has revealed important insights into possible working areas, the function of certain structures, and possible products being produced by particular glass cones. It is immediately apparent that the level of survival in Area 1 around glass cones A and B is far greater than in Area 2, suggesting that the eastern half of the site has seen greater disturbance by later activity. Significant in situ contexts from glass cone A and its glassworking area produced a range of glassworking waste fragments mostly predating the 1840s, with one of the Parisian ends associated with lead crystal glass production. Cone B and its structures are most notable for their strong association with the cordial bottles, and it most certainly represents the glass house within which they were being produced. Almost 50% of the cordial assemblage is associated with Cone B, and all of the cordial bottles were confined to Area 1. The vast majority of the glass associated with Cone B dates from around the 1840s or later, and like the cordial bottles, may represent some of the last products manufactured on site. In Area 2, Cone D also produced considerable quantities of wine and ale bottles dating from around the 1840s or later, the most significant finds here being the Carrera water bottle fragments that came from the furnace and were not found anywhere else on site. Cone C was more heavily disturbed than the others, but did produce two large cullet stores in its adjacent structures. The Salamander Street glass assemblage forms an interesting and significant group of material, largely representing the remains of the later stages of glass production by the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company, with a large assortment of wine and ale bottles and cordial bottles, as well as other classifications, with significant quantities of cullet, glassworking waste, and glass slag that was generated during the various stages of glass production. There's limited evidence for the earlier Edinburgh Glasshouse Company, which mostly survives as residual materials and smaller quantities of more heavily fragmented finds, though the structures, furnaces, and glass houses would have carried over from one phase to the next, with alterations and modifications as required, along with much of the tools, as well as the workers and their knowledge and techniques required to produce the glass. The poor survival of materials from the earlier phase is likely due to the intensive use of broken glass as cullet for recycling in later glass batches, with the majority of the assemblage likely representing the remaining unused cullet hoards and the failures of the very last bottles produced on site before the Edinburgh and Leith Glass Company closed the glassworks for good. The assemblage is considered to be of national significance, representing an important period in the Scottish glass industry that bridges the gap between 18th and early 19th century mouth-blown hand-finished products and the later increased methods of mechanization and the proliferation of products being produced, which would lead up to the machine-made products of the later 19th and 20th centuries. So if you find yourself in the area of Salamander Street, have a look at this information board and the circular footprint of one of the cones that's laid out amongst the new housing. Thank you very much.